My name is Will Wirtz with the LaRouche Political Action Committee, and we're here today interviewing State Senator from Virginia, Richard Black, who is a retired colonel from the U.S. military. He was also the chief JAG officer in the criminal division at the Pentagon. And he has extraordinary experience in terms of particularly Syria, where he's visited a number of times. The purpose of this interview is to get Senator Black's views of the current crisis surrounding the allegation of a chemical weapons attack in East Ghouta, in the city of Douma, Syria.
Yes. You know, I've been watching this very closely. I think all of us have, because President Trump has surrounded himself by a war cabinet. When he chose John Bolton is as extreme as anybody that you can find in the foreign policy arena. Very much an extremist on war. He was one of the individuals who promoted the invasion of Iraq, which turned out to be based on false premises. And yet here he is again. And he is an individual who is likely to call for war in many circumstances. So anyway, so we had this situation boiling up. It started several weeks ago, where the British began this hysterical media campaign saying that the Syrian army was going to use poison gas against the terrorists in the East Ghouta suburbs. This is a very large area deep in the suburbs of Damascus, which is a sprawling city. They've held it since about 2012. And built a system of underground tunnels that they've used to, you know, when the Syrians would try to restore order, they would emerge from somewhere and ambush them and slaughter a bunch of them. So they had held it for all this time. And the British claimed that the Syrian army, which had massed to finally eliminate the Ghouta pocket, that they were going to use poisonous gas. And it sounded like it was going to happen imminently. Well, as it turned out, the Syrian army, led by the Tiger forces, by the Republican Guard, by some very elite groups, they managed to burst through the enemy ranks by attacking from unexpected quarters, and they rolled over the terrorists with such rapidity that they actually captured the major chemical weapons facility that was possessed by the terrorists. This apparently was the facility that was to be used to create a hoax, to create an incident where the terrorists would fire on civilians, claiming that it was the Syrians. And once they had lost this laboratory, then they didn't have anything else to fight with. And before long, a major part of the entire Ghouta pocket had simply evaporated. And so finally, you had one group, which was Jaish al-Islam, and it holds the city of Douma. Now, a little bit further away, you have another pocket, which is totally held by ISIS. But all of the action right now is at Douma. Well, the Syrian army attacked Douma, and they had similar success. They were breaking through all of the barriers that were there. And so finally, Jaish al-Islam agreed that they would conduct peace talks, and they arrived at an agreement that they would move some of their people out into other rebel-held areas. They asked that their severely wounded be evacuated by bus, and the Syrian government sent in air-conditioned buses and evacuated the casualties that they had, and then began to evacuate the soldiers themselves. They wouldn't let them carry their heavy weapons, but they let them carry their sidearms, their automatic rifles, and so forth. And so the evacuation was taking place. The battle for Ghouta was won. It was essentially over, and it was just sort of a matter of arranging to evacuate the terrorists, because it's been the policy of Syria to cause as little damage to property and as little damage to human life as possible. And consequently, rather than duke it out to the bitter end, they simply allow the terrorists to evacuate, and they've done this throughout the war. Very small number of casualties. In this, I think the United Nations is estimating about 1,600 civilians have been killed, which, considering the magnitude of this battle, is very small. And so we had this situation where the war was won, the terrorists were being evacuated, and then the terrorists said, well, give us a truce so that we can kind of get some things arranged. And under the cover of the truce, the White Helmets, who are an arm of Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda, to remind our viewers, is the group that flew 4 aircraft into the Twin Towers in the Pentagon and slaughtered 3,000 Americans on 9/11. That's what White Helmet is. And so White Helmet has staged a provocative incident, and they portrayed it as a poison gas attack. They claimed it was a sarin gas attack. Sarin gas is a colorless, odorless gas. If sarin gas were here in this room today, we wouldn't know it until we fell over.
Right.
And yet the claims are that people smelled chlorine, and so the terrorists don't entirely understand the chemistry of what they're working with. So they mix up what chlorine gas is, which has a very strong characteristic aroma, and sarin gas. But anyway, they made this claim, and immediately, just on cue, all of the major NATO powers said, we've got to attack Syria. They never said, well, we need to find out whether an attack occurred, and we've got to find out, if it did, who caused it. It was just automatic, okay, we've got to attack Syria. So it's clearly a pretext, and I suspect that it was a pretext that the British were involved in because of their hysterics several weeks before the chemical laboratory was captured by the Syrian army. So now here we are on the verge of attacking Syria, and it is not even clear that there was an attack. There was a very credible, now, and this could, we don't know for sure, but very credible fellow. He was an English-speaking physician from the major hospital in Douma, and he said, we've never had any casualties brought in. We've never had any reports of poison gas or anything of that sort. Now, if this had occurred, certainly you would have had a flood of casualty. Even if, let's say, their initial report was, I think, 40 people had been killed. Even with that, you'd have had a flood of people being brought into the hospital, and everybody would have known about it. Well, here's the, he's reporting, but we haven't heard about anything. So we don't even know that this happened. This may just simply be much like Khan Shaykhun, which was a propaganda ploy to get us to fire missiles, which we did. President Trump fired missiles. And now it's not clear, but we could be on the verge of attacking the good guys to help the bad guys. Because once this final pocket is cleared out, and it's not having to be cleared out by combat, it's being cleared out by emptying it out with buses and evacuating these people. And the people, by the way, are ecstatic that they're finally released, because they've been held hostage since 2012. And they're all reporting about how they were enslaved, how Jaish al-Islam was famous for, they build these steel cages and they would put women in them, and then wherever they were staging an attack on Damascus by firing mortars or artillery, they would put a cage filled with these women hostages, so that the Syrian army couldn't respond in kind. So now they're gone. I mean, the war for East Ghouta is over, and there remains only one small pocket, totally controlled by ISIS. And the United States is considering going in and attacking the legitimate, duly elected Syrian government in order to prevent them from attacking this last pocket of ISIS in Damascus. And the idea that we would align ourselves with ISIS against the elected government that clearly represents the people is astounding.
Two questions. You mentioned the British role in this. And of course, the British were involved in the dodgy dossier that brought us to Iraq under Tony Blair. We have the Steele dossier, which is being used against the President of the United States for the last year, which has unverified claims in it.
False claim. I mean, I think most people by this time would say, if you can't verify them after all this time, they're lies.
Right. And then you have the Skripal case, where again involving the British, who refused to even allow a transparent investigation.
And there is an international treaty that deals with how you deal with these things, and they refuse to abide by it. So it's basically, it's our claim and you accept it. Don't look behind the screen. Ignore the man behind the screen.
So what do you think is occurring in terms of the British role in all of these situations? And of course, what's been pointed out is even by De Mistura during the UN debate yesterday, the international implications of a strike on Syria when there are Russians present in Syria who are vulnerable under such a strike. The Russians have warned that there will be consequences if Russians are casualties, either accidentally or not. So we're at a very, very dangerous situation, and the British are playing a very perfidious role in this whole situation. What's your sense of this?
Let me tell you, Will. Right now, the Western world, and the British are certainly instigators of this, but we're certainly not without blame. The French are certainly not. We have maneuvered ourselves to a point where the degree of risk, I think, is as high as it was when the Archduke of Austria was assassinated, causing an explosion into the First World War, enormous bloodshed, suffering, destruction. And the First World War, of course, was sort of just a prelude and laid the groundwork for the Second World War and the vast destruction that took place. Now, what makes this worse than the First World War situation is that while Russia, we outspend Russia 11-1, our defense budget is so big that it equals the combined total of the next 14 largest nations in terms of defense spending. Russia, China, Germany, Korea, France, it just goes on and on. Yeah. We have a gargantuan defense budget, and we are, so we're more than a match for the Russians. The Russians, I mean, they're, while they have a fine army and a fine military, it's much smaller. It just can't compare. However, where we do have equality is with nuclear power. Right. Both sides apparently have roughly 1,500 nuclear weapons that are set to go like that. There are roughly 7,000 on either side, which are capable of being used in short order. That is enough probably to destroy 2/3 of humanity. And certainly the Western world as we know it would be practically annihilated. All of our major cities, right here in Virginia, Norfolk, biggest naval base on earth, would simply be gone. This county, which has huge internet traffic, would be gone. The Pentagon would be gone. New York City, totally gone. It would totally be erased from the earth. And we have people like John Bolton who are sufficiently reckless to where, for their self-interest, they are willing to risk the death of perhaps 2 billion people, just simply purging them from the face of the earth. And it is incumbent on the president to recognize the extraordinary danger that we face. We have been building up to this, and many of us elected Donald Trump on a promise that he was going to reduce our, sort of normalize our relations with Russia. Right. He was going to stop trying to overthrow President Assad and work with the Syrians. He was going to downgrade the importance of NATO, and he was going to give up regime change. Right. Now, Trump has done a lot of the things he promised to do, but he has not done one thing that he promised to do in foreign affairs. Nothing. Well, you could take the exception of he was always very hostile towards the Iranian deal. Right. And so he was honest about that. That's probably the one thing that he's focused on most. But, when General Michael Flynn was planned to be the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn he would have been a godsend for this nation. He knew where the skeletons were buried. He understood what was going on. And I think he recognized the importance of drawing back from nuclear war. And so we have come to a point probably more dangerous than any time in my lifetime. And I'm counting the time when, as kids, we used to have air raid drills, and we get under our desks, and they tell you, you cover your eyes so you won't be blinded by the blast, and the back of your neck so something won't hit you and break your neck. And people understood nuclear war because we had dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, and they understood what it could do. Today, it's sort of vague. It's very distant. But the nuclear weapons that we have today make the ones we used in Japan look like firecrackers. They're nothing. So we are at a fantastically perilous juncture in our history, and someone needs to take control of it and say, let's pull back from the precipice.
I think there's, you raised the case of General Flynn and President Trump's intentions for better relations with Russia and his opposition to regime change. Now, it seems very much that he's been thwarted from carrying that out very much by the British-instigated coup attempt against his administration, which has been going on for over a year, really, as he said yesterday, going all the way back to shortly after he was nominated.
You're right, because the thing is, in evaluating, you have to remember that he was immediately placed on the defensive. And they made these wild, unfounded claims that Russia's coming. They've, they spent $100,000 on Facebook ads, half of them for Trump and half of them for Hillary Clinton. Oh, that's gonna change the world, isn't it? My gosh, if that could determine the outcome of an election, you and I would go out and we'd raise $100,000 and we would change the outcome of an election.
Right.
It was just so absurd. And here they have investigated and run this thing down ad nauseum to where people are utterly sick of it. But the problem is, it immediately put Trump on the defensive. They knew that if General Flynn didn't go, that we would have tensions go down. And that meant a lot, people who deal in the oil markets could potentially lose a lot of money on that. People who run drugs across the border could lose money there. And people, most of all, the most profitable of all vices is war. And if we didn't have war, there were people who were going to lose untold billions of dollars. Almost every major corporation profits from war. And so Michael Flynn had to go because he was the most dangerous person to their agenda. And then they continued to make these allegations and put Trump on the defensive to where Trump had to appear to be hostile towards Russia. If he seemed friendly, they'd say, aha, we told you that he really was going to normalize relations with Russia. He must be in their pocket. Well, no, he wasn't in their pocket. He just recognized that it's better not to have a nuclear war.
Right.
The United States has been at war in the Mideast for 17 years. That is longer than the First World War, the Second World War, and the Vietnam War combined. The grand total, we have been in longer than the First World War, the Second World War, and the Vietnam War. how long are we going to fight over there? And how can somebody demonstrate for you and for me one single thing that the United States people have ever gained from this? We've added $7 trillion to the national debt. Now, we made a big thing about how much President Obama had added to the national debt, and fair enough, but nobody bothered to say, well, wait a minute, this wasn't all just his personal inclinations. $7 trillion out of a $21 million debt is from these useless, stupid wars that we fought. And anybody who says, well, we had to do it because we had to suppress terrorism. When we started off, the terrorists amounted to hundreds of people. Before we were finished, they were launching 20, 30, 40 mechanized armored divisions. They were taking over capitals of countries. They were, they had expanded. They controlled an area that was larger than many countries and slaughtering hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Where is the benefit? What have we achieved? And believe me, nobody loves our troops more than I do. I've been wounded in action. I've volunteered over and over again for frontline combat, and I have tremendous respect for the guys who go over, and they believe in their country. They believe in what we're doing. God bless them. And my heart breaks for the ones who suffer. But we get the prosthetic devices, we get the caskets, and Saudi Arabia gets the oil money, and Great Britain gets the empire. What does the American people get? What do we get out of all of this stuff? Nothing.
Now, basically, you've got two things which have just occurred, and you've been addressing this. One, you had a raid organized by Special Counsel Mueller on the office and also, I believe, the home of President Trump's personal attorney. President Trump said this is an attack on the country and the values which we stand for. He called it a witch hunt again and said that the client lawyer privilege is dead. Now this occurs again, this is part of this entire British operation against the president, which you've described, and it occurs at the exact same time that you have the crisis in Syria. And as you said, President Trump is put in this defensive position where he's attacked for even calling President Putin and congratulating him on his election, for wanting to have a summit with him, for good relations. And on the other hand, he's forced in a position where he says, I'm tougher on Russia than my predecessor, Obama. Mm-hmm. And so he's being pressured to launch an attack, which is contrary to his own inclinations and contrary to the interests of the United States of America and of the world. And at the same time, he comes under this attack from Mueller, which some have suggested, like Dershowitz, the attorney, who's a Democrat, this represents a dangerous day for American constitutional rights.
This whole thing is a frontal attack on the U.S. Constitution. The Sixth Amendment to the Constitution guarantees people the right to counsel. The right to counsel, since the earliest days of the Republic, has been assured by the idea of confidentiality. If you are going to have counsel, effective assistance of counsel, you have to share all of your information with them. Alan Dershowitz is a Democrat, and he has a reputation as a liberal Democrat from long ago. He was an Obama supporter. He was a Hillary supporter. He But he, to his credit, believes in the United States Constitution. And he is absolutely distraught at what has happened. And he said, where is the ACLU? ACLU. The ACLU would be screaming to high heavens. You couldn't turn on any station without hearing somebody from the ACLU. Had this been a raid on the attorneys of Hillary Clinton or Obama or any other famous Democrat. And it shows the very rapid erosion of the Constitution in the United States. And I think it's very dangerous. Who knows? If they knew everything about you or me or any other American, they could find something that we have done. Years ago, there was a TV show back in the black and white days, and they bet a guy. They said, "Oh, you'll get $10,000 if you don't commit a crime for 1 week." And the guy went for a week, and they had him on the next week. They said, "Well, it looks like you beat us." And this is back in the days when people smoked. Yeah. And so they said, "Well, what do you plan to do with all your money?" And so the guy, the host of the show, opens up a pack of cigarettes, and he shuffles out the cigarette, and the guy takes a cigarette and he lights up. He says, "Well, I might do this or that." And the host says, "Well, I don't think so, because you just broke a law." And the guy's jaw dropped. He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the federal law says that when you open a pack of cigarettes, you have to break the stamp." So everybody, no matter how diligent they are, everybody breaks laws, because we are a nation where almost everything is regulated, everything you do, everything you say. And so they know if they get into information that's held by the attorney, there's something. And we've got a special prosecutor who does not feel constrained to find out certain things, and if they're not there, then dismiss it. The assault on the Sixth Amendment is the most blatant. I mean, I've been a lawyer since the 70s, and I've never seen this happen before. A raid on an attorney's office, a fishing expedition to get at the client. And so the Sixth Amendment is being torn down, just as the First Amendment has been torn down. The Fourth Amendment has been torn down. The 10th Amendment is gone. There's so much of what we grew up with as constitutional protections are destroyed. And so what is going on with the search of Trump's records is clearly unconstitutional in my view, and is immoral, and it is an attack on the Constitution.
Just a final question, which it's not so much a question. I just wanted to give you an opportunity perhaps to address President Trump. What would you say to him now in terms of the Syria situation in particular, but more generally as well?
I think I would tell him, look, there are certain areas where I can give you tremendous credit. Some of the economic things he's done, I think, have been very shrewd, very wise. The worst thing of all, though, is foreign policy. He has let foreign policy lead us to the brink of the Third World War, and his campaign promises were exactly on point. We don't really have any significant differences with Russia. I mean, not ones that are fundamental to the American national interest, except for stopping nuclear war. That is the one national interest. If we got away from that, then all of a sudden NATO already spends 4 times as much as Russia does on their defense budget, and he's complaining they're not spending enough. Well, if 4 times isn't enough, how many times is? So we need to diminish the role of NATO. Regime change needs to be absolutely out. And right now, the United States has occupied, with our forces, 1/3 of Syria, and we've done it secretly. We've got about 6,000 troops on the ground. Remember, no boots on the ground. About 6,000 of them. A couple of them were killed just yesterday or day before. And we have a minimum of 12 American bases on sovereign Syrian territory. And we're trying to redraw the map of Syria in a way that will absolutely guarantee the next war. And so he should go back to what he did, is we will work with Syria, we will end the war, and do away with regime change. All of the things he campaigned on were great ideas. And he has, I would give him a 0 on foreign policy right now. I think it's very poor, and he has surrounded himself. He always said, I know how to pick the very best people. He has the worst war cabinet. I mean, at this point, we look at General Mattis as being the dove of the bunch. We got Nikki Haley. She's supposed to be our top diplomat. You never hear her when she's not screaming hysterically for war. What kind of a diplomat is doing that? A diplomat is supposed to be trying to find common ground, trying to move away from war. Nikki Haley, she's similar to John Bolton that way. If somebody says, well, let's attack Ireland. Yeah, let's attack Ireland. Let's go after them, kill them. We got to get away from this. I mean, we've got people who are just really irrational. And even, Kushner, I think he's one of them. Even a member of Trump's family. I think it's a mistake to have so many family members around. First lady's fine. Everybody else, they can go and they can run the family business. But he needs to surround himself with people who want to carry out his agenda. And the people he has in foreign policy right now are people who are dead set against his agenda. And that's what I would tell him, is you need somebody who believes in what you campaigned on. And he needs to be your top advisor, not somebody like John Bolton, who hated everything that you ever said on the campaign trail. So that would be my advice. I'm not the president, unfortunately.
Well, I want to thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you very much. It's always good to see you, Will. I appreciate all the things that you're doing. It's groups like yours and all of the individuals who go out and network with their friends on social media, spread the film that you're going to put out online, and that's where our power is.
Yeah.
So I wish you the best.
Same to you.
Thank you.